Good morning and welcome to coffee time. Happy hour with, with Phil and Michelle. We got up early for this one because we have a really special guest, and she is an early morning riser, and so demanded that early start. And so we are here with Holly Murry with FRSTeam, and she's a good friend of mine. We've known each other for a little bit of time. It's been a couple years. I think we both were working in the same town. We started back when we were 12 years old, I think. So,
Yeah.
gosh, I won't put years on it, but it has been a bit. So what I'd like to do is learn a little bit about you, because I don't think a lot of people, if they don't pay attention on the trade show or they're not out at the dance floor, they might have
There you go.
missed
There you go.
you.
Late
Now,
at night, not early in the morning, by the way. By the way.
and that would have been a mistake to miss getting to know you and your impact on the industry. You've done some remarkable things over your time, but give us just kind of a rundown of your story, who you are, and how you got into restoration,
Yeah.
and where you are currently.
So obviously you already hinted to like we were 12 when we started.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, like in the mid 90s, fresh out of college,
Mhm.
I started at the FRSTeam corporate office. And at the time there were two locations, one in the Hayward office and one in Sacramento. And that's really where I started with the industry, really as a technician.
Yeah.
I think people are always a little shocked to learn that, I used to pack up dirty clothes in the early days and meet homeowners at lost sites and drive all over California picking up. And then the company expanded. We opened locations in the Northwest, Washington and Oregon, and then we opened locations in Colorado, which is where we met
Yep.
back in the late 90s, we'll say,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
late 90s ish.
Oh,
Oh,
just in case as you're turning, I'm like, I can just anyway.
you're like,
Keep going.
so yeah, in the late 90s is when we opened up Colorado and we met, and we continued to expand to eventually 11 company owned and operated locations, and then started the franchise in 2006 after actually working with a company in the UK to offer restoration services over in the UK. And we went, well, that worked. Let's try expansion in the country, and started the franchise in 2006, then did our first acquisition in 2018 to expand from dry cleaning to electronics. And then I did my second expansion and acquisition in 2021 with the expansion into full contents, really as a need in the industry that we started to see. So, yeah.
Don't give
Thank
us
you.
microphone. Don't give us microphone. You never
I'm-
get it back.
Okay, so you expanded into the UK first, and I want to know how that happened and why that's such an interesting to expand outside the US market.
Before
What?
We could go to Cleveland or
Right,
UK.
but we went to the UK.
Yeah, so it was actually unintentional. We were contacted by a very large dry cleaner in the UK called Johnson's Cleaning Johnson's, and they were looking at the restoration space. So they interviewed us and several competitors in the market space at the time to figure out who had maybe the best system for expansion, who did they want to learn from. They interviewed a lot of different people and they picked FRSTeam, which was thrilling for us at the time. And we created a lot of like the training modules and pieces that they needed to expand. And when that happened, then we were just about to experience the very first national contract for dry cleaning. And so when the very first contract happened with a TPA and a relatively large insurance company, we lost that opportunity. So we were like, whoa, we got to have coverage in the US. How do we make that happen?
Yeah.
And after working with the Johnsons in the UK, we were like, maybe we can franchise. And there may or may not have been some Appletinis involved.
Did you guys have really dialed in systems, process, and procedures at that time?
Define dialed in.
Did people know what they were doing?
I mean, I think one of the interesting things in our industry, and I've seen it so much over the years, has been there's dialed in and then there's like written processes and written systems and repeated. And as we expanded really more on the franchising side, we realized that everyone can't just pick up the phone and call Holly because she's been there almost 30 years, right? And or Michelle or Phil, right? Like you really have to have
I'm always
systems,
available.
right? He's like, I am available for a phone call. But so we started working with companies like Know How in our industry to really document those processes and procedures so that if somebody hires a new technician in our New York office, they can refer to that online training base. So no, back in the olden days, I would say it was more like, let's create them. And it was really just you would sit down with the most experienced team and most experienced staff and write out how to best communicate with a homeowner or how to go over your work authorization. And that way you could document it. So
When you became a franchise, did it change the way you did your work? Did anything fundamentally change? Or just now you're in a bigger space and you're leveraging your brand, or was process changed?
process was changed. I would say that it was better documented. It was really you had to really outline kind of the steps and procedures that you were taking so that you could really from a consistency level keep the quality of service across the country high.
Mm.
And sometimes if the further you get away from I don't know, we used to call it tribal knowledge, the harder it is to like really follow that piece, right? Because like, you know, the expertise lies in generational expertise or time on the job. It's hard to document some of that. So
I know the passing of the mic. Sorry.
Yes.
I'm curious how you've seen contents restoration change over these years, especially lately. Like, I feel like it's exploding, and there are more people realizing, oh, maybe we should be doing this. This is, something that we should be doing as part of our business and good for the carriers, good for the customer. So, how have you seen that evolve in the last even like 5 years? I think it's evolved, but how have you seen it evolve in the time you've been in the industry?
yeah, absolutely. So I would say, when I grew up in contents, right? But really on the dry cleaning and laundry side. And I think there's all different kinds of people refer to contents. And I think of contents more along the policy, right? So like what falls under contents in a policy. So when people are like, oh, you're new to contents, I'm like, am I? Because dry cleaning and laundry has been in the contents field for 30 years. So no, I'm not new to contents. So when I think about contents and the explosion, I see a lot of companies really titling things that they've always done, right? So all the contractors that we have the amazing pleasure of working with across the country have been doing contents as well as FRSTeam, right? They've been doing content manipulation forever. They just didn't call it contents, right? Now it's more of this pack, move, clean, store. And I think seeing the explosion, every time I turn around, there's some new full contents brand that's expanding across or a franchise system that you can buy into, which I think is amazing to see that. I think the challenging part is most contractors have always done manipulation on their own.
Yes.
TLI inventory, most of us have done. I mean, we've been total loss inventorying textiles for well over 30 years. And so I think there's kind of a spotlight on contents now. And I think for those of us that have been around for 30 years, contents was at some point really still this like wild, wild west, like textiles was, right? You could go to a million different dry cleaners in your local marketplace. Pricing was kind of all over the map. Who did DO, who didn't. And so I think it's been really interesting to see this kind of spotlight because there needs to be consistency, which is really what made us move more into what we call kind of content space, is to really, from a program standpoint, from a consistency, I've seen it, right? We all get those random bills where an adjuster that you're close with says, can you review this or look at it? We used to get them for dry cleaning back in the day before all the different pricing structures started creating kind of a pricing format for that. Now we're getting to see that from a contents perspective.
What's the difference between dry cleaning and restoration dry cleaning?
Yeah, that is a really interesting question. So, right, I think of it this way. When you think of, everybody does laundry likely at home, or someone in your household does laundry at home. There's a big difference between dealing with things that have contaminants, right? There's both a soil, a contamination, and an odor issue that you're dealing with restoration that you don't deal with on a retail level, right? On a retail level, you're dealing with a wine stain on your lapel, right? In restoration, you're dealing with soot or a protein fire or the stickiness and residue from a plastic fire. Those are not the same cleaning procedures. They're not the same chemicals that you're doing. And there's a completely different component you drop off at a dry cleaner. Right. Or you set your bag out front of your front door if you have door-to-door service, if you live in a metropolitan area. But with restoration, the homeowner isn't packing up their stuff and taking it somewhere. You've got to be able to go to them. And so there's a completely different component with packouts, right? Where you're packing up their items and you have to pay attention to how they handle all of their items, not just a handful of dry clean only items.
Okay. As you roll, one of the biggest things in expansion is controlling your product, controlling your service. And what would you tell somebody who's looking to go to multi-locations? Maybe they're going to expand regionally or bigger than that. How do you control quality, the product, the service when it's not you anymore? It's your brand. And there's a lot of trust in that.
So pick wisely first and foremost, right? When you think about your team, your people.
Okay.
When you think about your people, the people are the biggest factor, right? So whether you're franchising, whether you're expanding and just opening additional locations, who you're choosing from a culture, from a value proposition standpoint, right? We meet people all the time in our industry that don't always follow the same path of alignment, right? And so if you're going to have somebody manage your business, better make sure that you are ethically, culturally aligned with them so that they're representing your brand in the way that you see best fit. And I think that for us, I always say like choose slowly and get rid of them much faster if there's a inkling that you're not aligned.
Do you use a tool for that? Do you use any the assessments or is there?
Yeah, there's so many available on the market, right? So a lot of people will use varying like evaluation tools to really align. Some of them I think work great. I think I'm old school, I guess. So for me, it's about like if I sit with you and I'm really big with like if we're looking at management and leadership of a potential new location, we're doing dinners and lunches. I want to see how they interact with the staff at a restaurant. I used to say the best tell is when all of a sudden your luggage gets lost or a flight gets canceled or service is really bad. You will start to see like somebody's true colors really start to come out and come out quickly. Right.
Do you involve the spouses in those meetings?
Always. If somebody is married, right, or has a partner, we always want to make sure that we get an opportunity to meet them as well. Because I mean, let's admit it, right? This is a 24/7 job, especially in restoration. If your spouse is not okay or you're plus one, that you're going to get a phone call at 10 o'clock at night that you're going to have to handle, that's going to put strain on them personally, which eventually feeds into your professional life. Yeah.
Yes. So I think we talked about this last year on the authenticity panel that we did here and talking about you lead people across many different franchises and everybody has a different leadership style. Everybody owns their company a little bit differently than other people. And I see on Facebook, you're always traveling and meeting with your franchisees and always on the road. But how do you as a leader meet other leaders where they are? How do you lead other leaders? That's an interesting place to be in. And you have a lot of experience in that. So how do you lead other leaders?
Yeah. That's a really a question I don't think I've ever been asked, actually. And this is going to maybe sound interesting, but I don't actually think I lead other leaders. I think when you get a lot of leaders together in a room, for me, it's always about learning because the reality is that some of my franchisees actually do things better than I do. Right. And so I think for me, it's always just trying to talk to them about how they're handling different challenges or different situations. And you kind of idea storm at times, right? What's working, what's not working. And even at like our national conference for FRSTeam, we do a lot of roundtables, right? Where you get the leaders all together to talk about, hey, if you're having trouble hiring, right? If you're like all the hot things, right? Like how do you find great technicians and where do you find them and what do you pay them? And all those same conversations, I think I take amazing ideas even from our leadership group on a regular basis. I think it's more, when I think about leading, it's more about sharing those great ideas across our, platform and across our brand. when you hear something great that somebody came up with in New York, because there's amazing leaders across the country, right? And not even at my company. I try and listen to other restoration contractors. I've had some very long time relationships with owners of big restoration companies across the country, some in California and Colorado and New York. And to get to, and even Connecticut, right? Like I run into some of them at conferences and events like this that I'm like, wow, I've known you for 25 years and we'll sit and have a drink at a happy hour and talk about like what's going on with you. And you'll pick up an idea. And then I take those. And I think from a leadership standpoint, it's about sharing those great ideas more than it is leading them.
You've known them since you're 12 too, right?
Yes. Since 12,
Okay.
definitely 12.
So give me what the top things that are measured in your company. And this is maybe I'm gonna make you think for a minute, but
Yeah.
what are the measurements for either just defining success in an office or for individuals?
Yeah. And so, obviously there's a million KPIs that you can measure that are really about efficiencies and times and how long does it take you to contact in a homeowner? How long does it take you to get on site? How long does it take you to upload an estimate, right? The standard KPIs, which obviously I think are critical to measure for customer satisfaction, right? So if we don't contact a homeowner upon a receipt of an assignment for 2 days, obviously the homeowners are going to be happy. So I think those are things that, and then we do 360 reviews every year. So I want to know from the people that report to me confidentially, and even from our franchisees, how are we doing, right? Like, do you feel supported? Where are we succeeding? We hire a franchise business company to go in and again, monitor and manage our franchisees on their satisfaction. And then I think probably the most important thing that we measure is our employee, we call them state interviews, right? So like if you have a longtime employee who's phenomenal, you should probably find out why they're still there, right? Like what are we doing right that keeps you here? Because we've all lost great employees over the years, me included.
Is there a theme?
Culture, right? I mean, I hate to say it, but it's culture. It's when you walk in your office in the morning, do you walk around and say hello and good morning to everyone? And I think sometimes as an owner, you get little blinders on and you walk in your office and you have 19 things that hit the fan overnight or priorities. And you kind of forget that moment that, like, okay, I need to go back and say hello to the girl that's been pressing clothing for us for 30 years, or the person that folds laundry every day or cleans shoes, right? Or is disassembling a TV and say, hey, good morning. How was your weekend? And, what's going on with you? And I think that culture is what keeps people around.
Did a culture panel yesterday, and
Oh,
Marcy from Guarantee was talking, and we were having that conversation, and I said, the opposite of what you just said is fine. I'm fine.
oh,
Yeah.
which I use way too often, by the way. I really am okay.
Yeah, but not being genuine a lot of times. That's just like this
Oh,
canned response to anything. How are you? Fine. How are you? Fine. And you walk on.
well, and I feel like you have to, as a leader and an owner, you have to be paying attention and you have to be able, like,
Like, we'll dig into that. Like, fine.
yeah. And be really good at reading people, right? Like, especially if you work with someone, you should know when they walk in and they're a little off.
Yeah.
And care enough to pull them aside and say, hey, you seem off today. Is everything okay? What's going on?
I think that's what being the parent of multiple teenagers has taught me. And that question is, how was your day? Never comes up.
No.
Tell me something amazing that happened today, or tell me something you failed at today
Yeah.
and what you learned from it. Or, just because you can't just give a general question. And it's the same thing with employees. It's probably the same thing with pets too.
Right. How was your day? No, pets are always really excited to see you. Possibly when I come home from a trip way more than anyone else.
Exactly.
Right? They greet you at the door like it's been a million years since they've seen you. But you're right. I have 2 teenagers. My son graduates high school tomorrow, by the way.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Off to college in the fall. But yes, if I come home and I've had a really hectic day, it never fails. You revert to like, how was school today? Fine. Okay. Good talk.
So let me
See you tomorrow.
Let me tell you one of my big disappointments, and this is just in the world in general. You're about to move to a next level. I don't know. Is this your first in college?
Yes.
Okay. So everybody's
You
gonna
want me to
say-
cry
no,
on
everybody-
screen? What is
Come
happening?
on. No, everybody's gonna say, "Oh, congratulations, your son's off in college. This is great." And I got that, and I used to say that too. And then my first left for college, and then the house is empty, like that, like their space is empty and different. I'm not gonna make you cry. I'm trying to make you cry. It just changes that. It just
What is
changes
that television show where you try and get the like talk show people to cry? Knock it off.
It just changes that perspective, and you're about to enter that new place, and so it's just different. And
I think my daughter is actually way more concerned about my son leaving for college because for that exact reason, she's like, oh, then it's just me and mom and dad, and they're going to be all over me.
that's why the cool thing, I have twins at the end. So
Oh,
like-
there you go. See,
but we're not going to get deep into this. I'll give us a curve before I tear you down. So
I love it. Hey,
Michelle, do you have any questions? I know we'll someone get to a follow up here certainly, but
Well, no, I don't know that I love that question about. I'm like, don't ask that question, Phil, because my kids aren't that old, and I will sit here crying, even though I've got like 8 years before my first one graduates. But gosh, I'd be curious, I guess. So we talked about culture. Your biggest tip for what makes a culture good, because every company has a culture, but it's not always good. And I think people fall into the traps of, well, I threw them a barbecue over the summer, or I brought pizza in one day, but it goes so much deeper than that. So what's your biggest piece of advice for rooting a healthy company culture?
yeah, we've done a bunch of things. So I think emotional intelligence is really important. There's some really great apps that you can do to check in as an owner, right? Because the reality is you're going to have a bad day, and that's real. Owning your mistakes because you're going to make a lot of them over the years. Uh, and I think the hardest thing is you really have to be genuine. You mentioned that earlier. You can't fake it till you make it. Yes, I'm an extrovert and it's my natural personality to be that way. But if it's not, be genuine to who you are. But you honestly your staff has to feel like you care. And if they don't, then you need to hire somebody who is going to make sure that your staff always feels like you care.
Yep.
Because if that's not who you are, you need to find somebody who can bring that to your culture.
Okay.
And every barbecue, every pizza party, if it's just trying to make up for a lack of caring, but you're also the company that it's 10 o'clock at night on a Friday and you call your employee and just demand that they go out on a loss instead of make sure that they're available and that they don't have something else going on, it won't matter how many pizza parties you throw.
which is also why you invest in the family and the spouses in that
Correct.
relationship. So
Yeah, and you legitimately have to care. You really do have to really care about people.
this is probably not the closing question, so there'll be something else. So don't misinterpret my question. Were there things that like failures you had that became like foundational issues? Like I learned something from this.
Oof.
And
Yeah.
okay.
Where to start? There's really been so many. It's hard to narrow down. Which mistakes were the largest? The number of mistakes has been pretty substantial over the years, and all of them I say you learn from, right? And if you're not learning from them, then you're bound to repeat them. Probably early on, right? My old business partner taught me a very valuable lesson about the world isn't actually about you. It's actually about other people, right? Like there was a moment where I was like stomping my feet and be like, but it's about me. And she was like, no, it's not actually about you. And I was like, wait, what? And I think that was a really valuable lesson that I had to learn from because it wasn't. It's about the employees. It's about the team. It's about the homeowners that we handle. It's about our contractors' needs um and the joy that you actually get in helping somebody else.
Yeah.
And I not that I haven't always really loved helping people, but I think that really hit home for me is that if you want to feel better about yourself or you're having a bad day, doing something for someone else will actually bring you more joy ever than getting yourself a massage that day. Right? Like, and I know that sounds crazy, but it's like, if I'm down in the dumps and I go get a massage, yes, the massage feels great, but I don't feel better. But if I go like work in a soup kitchen or find a charity to get and the same goes for your staff. Like if you feel like your staff is really struggling, COVID's impacted them financially, whatever it is, do something that involves them in helping others. And you could probably get a pretty good lift in what's happening with your culture, because they're all going to go home that day and actually feel really good about themselves. So that was probably the most like lifelong lesson I learned early on, was when you think it's about you, it's not you.
It's not about you, Holly.
It's not. Definitely not.
I mean, when you're 12 and getting into it,
Yes.
it does feel like it's all about you when you're 12. So that
Yes.
is the beauty of being 12.
Yes.
Okay, so we ask the same question to wrap it up every single time. It's to share a favorite story from the industry. So now it doesn't have to be a failure. It could be something beautiful or whatever. I don't know, a funny story or a crazy loss that you were on, whatever it may be, but a good story.
So I knew this question was coming.
I
The
prepped
only
it
one I
all.
prepped for. And it's interesting because my original story was all the funny stories, right? Like the funny things that we come across when handling contents, the random things, the random people. And then I thought, I was talking with one of our carrier partners last night, and he was like, we were talking about a totally off the subject. And he was like, you should tell that story. And I was like, oh, so here goes. I had been an owner at FRSTeam for about 15 years. I was at a conference, right? Like this one, not this one, but like this one. And because there's so many, and I don't want anyone to be like, what conference was it? Who was she talking to? But I had a gentleman come up to me and say, oh my God, I just learned that you're an owner of the company. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Like, it's not on your like card, I guess. And so I was like, that's great. And he offhandedly said, all these years, because he had known me for a long time, I always just thought you were this happy candy girl. I know the face. Michelle, you're on camera. Um, and I remember sitting there for a minute. And, when I entered the industry, there weren't a lot of women in our industry. And a lot of them did hold sales roles, right? But I was like, wow. And I think for me, that story, which is crazy, but I actually watched it again last night. Somebody introduced a friend of mine who I've known for a very long time, who's an owner of a very large, successful full restoration company. And he introduced her as like, I was just shocked to learn that she was an owner. And I was like, and the client that I was with was like, that's why you should tell the story. It's because it still happens today. And so I asked him like why he just assumed. And the second lesson from the story was because I was so nice and friendly. And I was like, so as an owner, we're not allowed to be nice or friendly. Like I also felt like there were so many things. But I think it's been really interesting, like as we think about the world that we all live in, I think we forget sometimes that Know How has an article about this, about like how you reference people and how you talk to people. And I think it was really interesting. We forget because of our upbringing and our history. He didn't mean anything by it. I was really not offended, other than shocked a little. But I think it's important as we go out in the world, right? Some of us have been in this industry for 30 years to remember that like this younger generation has different titles and different names, and trying to pay attention to the world that you're now living in, I think is an important lesson in life.
Goes back to it's not about you
Right.
statement. And so I
Exactly.
think that when the focus is on someone else,
Yeah.
and I mean, putting people in a box doesn't necessarily, it's not
No.
a problem. It's just what we tend to do.
Yeah. And it's natural. It's totally natural, right? And we all do it. So it's not like, I think just trying to be more self-aware, right? Like it's all that self-learning process that I think is really, but it's interesting to think about some of those different stories and moments that have happened over the years.
You're
that I'm
too
like,
nice to be president.
you're too nice to be
You're too nice to
president.
own this.
Right? Like owners are mean and angry and terrible people. And I was like, I'm insulted on both fronts, really, at this point. Like, no, because I know business owners in this industry, and I don't think we're all
I don't either. I'm
like,
to think my Rolodex. I'm like, I don't.
there's some really amazing people in our industry. So I just thought it was an interesting story. So I promised I might share it. So there you go.
Oh, there you go. Good. We could go to the coffee bar,
right?
And share a dozen more. But I
assume when you said happy hour, there was going to be like mimosas and breakfast cocktails.
Bloody Marys. There was some consideration of that, but
Sorry.
yeah, we don't do a good job planning our cocktails around our parties. But I was drinking coffee. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just saying.
I'm still on water. I haven't gotten to coffee yet. It's just like,
Thank
well,
you very
thank you
much.
guys.
Yeah, thank
I
you.
really appreciate it. I always love talking to the two of you, for the last few years,
A couple.
just a couple years.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you
Okay.
guys.